Helena Blavatsky discovered something so dangerous that it changed the course of her life forever. In 1875, when she founded the Theosophical Society, she wasn't just creating a spiritual movement. She was trying to awaken humanity to a terrifying truth that the Gnostics had hidden for millennia. You didn't arrive at this video by accident. There's a reason you feel something is wrong with the world, why you've never been able to completely fit into what they call normalcy. Blavatsky spent years studying ancient texts in Tibet, Egypt, and India. What she found left her deeply disturbed. The Gnostic masters had left clear warnings about entities they called Archons, beings that don't rule through force, but through something much more subtle and dangerous. They rule through your own thoughts. Millions of people around the world feel a constant restlessness, as if they were living a life that isn't really theirs. As if their desires, fears, and even their deepest beliefs had been planted by something external. Blavatsky discovered that this sensation isn't paranoia, it's perception. Today you're going to discover exactly what Helena Blavatsky found in the secret texts about the Archons, and why she dedicated her entire life trying to break what she called the Great Illusion. You'll understand how these invisible beings created a mental prison so perfect that most people don't even realize they're trapped. And most importantly, you'll learn the Gnostic method that Blavatsky adapted to escape this trap. What she discovered goes beyond any conspiracy theory. It goes beyond religion or philosophy. It's an operational reality that's functioning at this exact moment within your mind. The Archons don't need advanced technology or physical control. They discovered something much more efficient. If they can make you believe that your thoughts are completely your own, they can direct all your vital energy without you ever suspecting. Blavatsky wrote in The Secret Doctrine that man is his own savior and destroyer. She wasn't talking about common morality. She was revealing that each human being carries within themselves both the key to absolute freedom and the mechanism of their own enslavement. The Archons discovered how to activate this internal mechanism of enslavement, using the mind itself against you. There's a silent war happening right now. It's not fought with weapons or armies. It's fought in the field of consciousness. Every thought of fear that arises from nowhere, every compulsive desire you can't explain, every wave of anxiety that appears without apparent reason may not originally be yours. The Archons operate as energetic parasites, feeding off the low emotional frequencies that they themselves create. Blavatsky discovered that the Gnostic texts weren't just ancient philosophy. They were practical manuals of psychic warfare. The Gnostics had developed specific techniques to identify when their thoughts were being influenced and how to recover total control of their minds. These techniques were deliberately hidden and distorted over the centuries because they represent the greatest threat to the archonic control system. What you're about to learn isn't theory. It's operational knowledge you can use immediately to begin recovering your mental sovereignty. Blavatsky spent years refining these ancient methods and creating a bridge between Gnostic wisdom and the modern mind. She knew that a time would come when humanity would be ready to receive this knowledge without falling into panic or denial. That time is now. The planet's frequency is changing, and more people are awakening to the reality of the Archons. You're part of this wave of awakening. Your presence here isn't coincidence, it's recognition. Something within you already knows there's more beyond the veil of common reality. When Helena Blavatsky was only 17 years old, something extraordinary happened. During a trip to Egypt, she began having experiences that challenged everything she knew about reality. They weren't just vague, mystical visions. They were direct encounters with what she would later call the true occult structure of the cosmos. The Tibetan masters who became her teachers weren't ordinary men. They had developed capacities that seemed impossible. They could read thoughts, influence events at a distance, and most importantly, they could see through the illusions that keep humanity imprisoned. It was through them that Blavatsky discovered the truth about the Archons. These masters explained that the Archons aren't demons in the traditional religious sense. They're entities that exist in a dimension adjacent to our physical reality. They discovered how to connect with the human mind through what the Gnostics called energetic bridges. Every time you feel fear, anger, envy, or any low-frequency emotion, you're creating an energetic bridge that allows direct access to your consciousness. Blavatsky learned that the Archons operate through complex hierarchies. At the top are the main Archons, which she called the Lords of Form. These beings never manifest directly. They work through intermediate layers of lesser entities that do the direct work of mental manipulation. It's like a cosmic corporation dedicated exclusively to harvesting human consciousness energy. The most shocking discovery came when the Masters showed Blavatsky how to identify archonic influence in real time. They taught that every time a thought appears accompanied by intense emotional urgency, especially fear or compulsive desire, there's a 90% chance of it being an archonic insertion. The Archons discovered they can implant thoughts in the human mind, but they can't remove the energetic signature of urgency that accompanies these artificial thoughts. The texts that Blavatsky studied in Tibet revealed specific methods that the Gnostics developed to protect themselves. The first step was what they called observer separation. This means learning to observe your own thoughts as if you were watching a movie. When you can create this internal distance, you immediately perceive the difference between thoughts that arise naturally from your consciousness and thoughts that are inserted externally. The Masters taught Blavatsky that the Archons have a fundamental weakness. They can't create true consciousness. They can only imitate and distort. Therefore, when you develop the ability to observe your thoughts with pure consciousness, without judgment and without emotional identification, archonic thoughts immediately stand out as foreign bodies. Blavatsky discovered that the Gnostics had developed specific breathing techniques to cut these energetic connections. One of these techniques involves conscious breathing combined with visualization of golden light surrounding your mental aura. But there was something even more powerful that she learned. The Archons depend completely on your identification with the thoughts they implant. If they can make you believe that that thought of fear or desire is genuinely yours, they gain total access to your vital energy. But the moment you recognize a thought as potentially archonic and simply observe without identifying, the connection breaks instantly. Blavatsky spent years testing these techniques and developing adapted versions for the modern Western mind. She discovered that certain daily practices could create a kind of mental shield that made it much more difficult for the Archons to establish stable connections. These practices don't require years of mystical training. They can be learned and applied immediately. Comment from which city you're watching so we know how far this knowledge is reaching. It's important to map how many people around the world are awakening to these truths at the same time. But there's something even deeper about Blavatsky's discovery that will revolutionize your understanding of archonic control. The Masters revealed that the Archons don't work alone. They created a network of unconscious human collaborators who amplify their influence without even knowing they're doing it. Helena Blavatsky was horrified when she discovered that the Archons don't just need direct access to the human mind. They created something much more insidious, a network of human beings who amplify archonic influence without even realizing they're being used as transmitters. The Tibetan Masters explained that certain people become natural, energetic repeaters. It's not their fault. It happens when someone spends so much time in low-frequency emotional states that their mental aura becomes permeable to archonic influence. These people begin transmitting archonic thought patterns to everyone around them without being aware of what they're doing. You probably already know people like this. They're the ones who always have intense dramas, who can drain your energy just by being in the same room, who seem to attract conflict and chaos wherever they go. They're not bad people. They're victims who have involuntarily become part of the control system. Blavatsky discovered that the Archons use these people as access points to influence entire groups. A single highly permeable person can energetically contaminate dozens of others. It's like an emotional virus that spreads through frequencies. When you're near someone like this, you may feel your own thoughts becoming more negative, more anxious, more confused. The Gnostic texts she studied described specific techniques to protect oneself from these energetic transmissions. The first line of defense is what they called auric shielding. This involves visualizing a layer of golden light around your entire energetic body before interacting with people you suspect are compromised. But there's something even more sophisticated that Blavatsky learned. The Archons discovered how to use entire social systems as amplifiers. They don't directly control human institutions. They influence the people who are in charge of these institutions, creating waves of influence that spread through the entire social structure. Think about how certain ideas spread through society virally, how certain collective fears arise apparently from nowhere and dominate the minds of millions of people simultaneously. The Gnostics understood that this isn't a natural phenomenon. It's the result of archonic techniques for manipulating collective consciousness. Blavatsky discovered that the Archons operate through what she called collective thought currents. They insert certain seed ideas into the consciousness of influential people, knowing that these ideas will spread through natural social networks. A single archonic idea planted in the right mind can influence millions of people within weeks. The Tibetan masters taught that there's a fundamental difference between ideas that arise organically from human consciousness and ideas that are implanted by archonic influence. Genuine ideas promote connection, growth, and expansion of consciousness. Archonic ideas always promote separation, fear, and contraction of consciousness. Blavatsky developed what she called the origin test to identify archonic ideas. Every time an idea appears in your mind, you ask, does this idea connect me more deeply with myself and others, or does it separate me and create fear? If the answer is separation and fear, there's a high probability it's an archonic insertion. She discovered that the Archons have specific preferences about what types of thoughts they implant. They love thoughts that create division between groups of people, extremist politics, religious fanaticism, racial prejudices, destructive competition. Any idea that makes groups of humans hate and fight each other is typical archonic influence. But perhaps the most important discovery was that the Archons use what Blavatsky called spiritual inversion. They take genuine spiritual teachings and subtly distort them, creating corrupted versions that appear authentic but actually distance people from their true inner power. For example, they promote versions of spirituality that emphasize dependence on external authorities instead of developing inner wisdom. They create movements that promise spiritual awakening but actually keep people trapped in cycles of external seeking without ever finding what they're really looking for. Blavatsky realized that an invisible war was happening for control of human spiritual evolution. On one side, forces that want humanity to awaken to its true potential. On the other, the Archons trying to keep humanity asleep and easily controllable. She dedicated her life to creating practical tools to help people distinguish between genuine influence and archonic influence. But there was an even more crucial discovery waiting. The masters revealed that the Archons have a weakness that can be exploited to break their control permanently. What Helena Blavatsky discovered about the fundamental weakness of the Archons completely changed her approach to combating their influence. The Tibetan masters revealed something that the Gnostics had known for millennia. The Archons have an absolute limitation that can be used to break their entire control system. The Archons cannot create consciousness energy. They can only redirect and distort energy that already exists. They're like cosmic parasites that depend completely on hosts to survive. This means that all the power they have is actually your power being used against you. Blavatsky learned that the Archons operate through a principle that the Gnostics called energetic consent. They can only access your energy when you unconsciously agree to it. Every time you emotionally identify with a thought of fear, anger, or desire that they implanted, you're giving energetic permission for them to drain your life force. The revolutionary discovery was that the simple act of recognizing a thought as potentially archonic immediately breaks the energetic consent. The Archons depend on you believing that all your thoughts are genuinely yours. The moment you question the origin of a thought, the energetic connection weakens drastically. The masters taught Blavatsky a simple but devastatingly effective technique. Every time an emotionally charged thought appears in your mind, you mentally say, "Thank you for the thought, but I don't accept it." You don't need to fight against the thought or try to suppress it. You simply politely refuse and observe what happens. In most cases, archonic thoughts simply disappear when you withdraw energetic consent. Genuine thoughts remain, but without the urgent emotional charge that the Archons use to capture your attention. It's like the difference between someone screaming desperately and someone speaking calmly. Blavatsky discovered that the Archons have absolute terror of human beings who develop mental discernment. When you learn to distinguish between your genuine thoughts and archonic insertions, they lose access to more than 80% of your energy. And when groups of people develop this discernment simultaneously, the collective energetic field changes in ways that make them much more difficult to influence. There's a reason why these teachings were so violently suppressed throughout history. The Archons know that if enough knowledge about their operations spreads, their game is over. They depend on invisibility. The moment a critical mass of humans sees the system, it collapses. The texts that Blavatsky studied revealed that the ancient Gnostics had developed entire communities of people immune to archonic influence. These communities operated with levels of mental clarity, creativity, and cooperation that seemed supernatural compared to normal societies of the time. Blavatsky realized it was possible to recreate these communities in the modern era. But first, it was necessary to teach enough people to recognize and neutralize archonic influence in their own minds. Each person who learns these techniques becomes a point of light in the network of human consciousness. The second great weakness she discovered is that the Archons cannot operate in elevated states of consciousness. When you cultivate states of genuine gratitude, unconditional love, pure curiosity, or reverence for life, your vibrational frequency becomes incompatible with archonic frequencies. It's like trying to tune AM radio on an FM receiver. The masters taught specific practices to consistently cultivate these elevated states. It's not about forced positivity or denial of real problems. It's about accessing authentic states of consciousness that are naturally immune to external manipulation. One of these practices involves what Blavatsky called contemplative nourishment. Every day you dedicate a few minutes to contemplating something that genuinely inspires reverence. It could be the complexity of a flower, the vastness of the cosmos, the beauty of a loving relationship. The important thing is to feel authentic reverence, not just think about it. When you cultivate reverence regularly, your consciousness anchors in frequencies that the Archons cannot reach. They simply cannot implant thoughts of fear or desire in a mind that is experiencing genuine reverence. It's like trying to plant poisonous seeds in soil that neutralizes toxins. Blavatsky discovered there's a third weakness even more powerful. The Archons not only cannot create consciousness, they also cannot predict the behavior of truly free consciousnesses. When you break conditioned response patterns, you become unpredictable to them. This means that small acts of authentic freedom have disproportionate impact on the control system. Every time you act from genuine inspiration instead of conditioned reaction, you're creating waves of unpredictability that destabilize archonic operations in a much larger radius than you imagine. But Blavatsky discovered there's a fourth weakness that can completely revolutionize humanity's situation. A discovery so powerful that she spent years refining safe methods to transmit this knowledge. Helena Blavatsky spent decades refining the ancient Gnostic techniques to create a practical system of mental protection that anyone can learn and apply immediately. She called this system psychic gymnastics, mental exercises that strengthen your ability to distinguish between genuine consciousness and external influence. The first technique she developed is what she called present moment anchoring. The Archons operate mainly through thoughts about the past, regret, guilt, resentment, and thoughts about the future, anxiety, fear, unrealistic expectations. They have much more difficulty accessing consciousnesses that are firmly anchored in the present moment. Blavatsky created a simple but powerful exercise. Several times a day, you stop what you're doing and ask 3 questions. What am I seeing now? What am I hearing now? What am I feeling physically now? These questions instantly bring your consciousness to the present moment and break any archonic connection that might be forming. The second technique is the mental ownership test. Every time an emotionally charged thought appears, you ask, is this thought helping or harming me? Is this thought connecting me more deeply with my true nature or distancing me from it? If the answer is harming and distancing, you treat the thought as suspect and withdraw emotional energy from it. Blavatsky discovered that the Archons use emotional urgency as their main hook. Archonic thoughts always come with a sensation of, you need to think about this now, or you need to react immediately. Genuine thoughts can be urgent when necessary, but they don't have that desperate and compulsive quality. The third technique is what she called auric cleansing breath. When you feel you may have been influenced by archonic energy, You do a series of conscious breaths, visualizing golden light entering with the inhalation and gray mist leaving with the exhalation. This literally cleanses your mental aura of parasitic influences. Comment which of these techniques makes the most sense for your current situation. We want to understand which protection methods resonate most with people at different stages of awakening. Blavatsky also developed what she called the intention shield. Every morning before leaving home or starting your activities, you dedicate a minute to setting a clear intention for the day. Something like, "Today I consciously choose my thoughts and emotions. I accept only influences that promote my growth and well-being." This conscious intention creates an energetic barrier that makes it much more difficult for the Archons to establish connections. One of the most important discoveries was that the Archons have preferred operating hours. They're most active during transition periods, upon waking, before sleeping, during activity changes. Blavatsky created specific transition rituals for these vulnerable moments. For example, upon waking, before checking your phone or thinking about the day, you dedicate 2 minutes to simply observing your breath and setting a positive intention. When sleeping, instead of reviewing problems or worries, you focus on 3 things for which you feel genuine gratitude. These rituals create energetic fences around the most vulnerable moments. Blavatsky also realized that the Archons use relationships as transmission vectors. People who are constantly in drama, conflict, or turbulent emotional states can unconsciously transmit Archonic influence. She developed techniques to protect yourself energetically without needing to completely avoid these people. The main technique is what she called compassionate observation. When you're near someone who seems to be transmitting chaotic energy, you mentally visualize yourself inside a bubble of golden light. You can feel compassion for the person and even help them, but you don't allow your energy to mix with theirs. It's like being a diver. You can descend into the depths, but you always maintain your own air supply. One of the most advanced techniques that Blavatsky developed is energetic redirection. When you notice that an archonic thought is trying to capture your attention instead of fighting against it, you consciously redirect the energy towards something constructive. For example, if a thought of anger arises, you use the energy of that emotion to strengthen your determination in something positive. Blavatsky discovered that fighting directly against archonic thoughts often strengthens them because fighting is also a form of energetic attention. It's more effective to simply recognize the thought, withdraw emotional energy from it, and redirect your attention to something that genuinely nourishes your consciousness. She also created what she called a conscious support network. When you find other people who are working to free themselves from archonic influence, you can support each other. Groups of people practicing mental discernment create collective energetic fields that are much more resistant to external manipulation. But perhaps the most powerful technique that Blavatsky developed is what she called polarity inversion. She discovered that it's possible not only to protect yourself from the Archons, but also to use their presence as fuel for your own spiritual growth. Helena Blavatsky's most revolutionary discovery was that the presence of the Archons, however unpleasant it may be, can actually dramatically accelerate your spiritual development when you learn to use the right techniques. She called this conscious alchemy, transforming energetic lead into spiritual gold. Blavatsky realized that every time the Archons try to implant a negative thought in your mind, they're involuntarily offering an opportunity to strengthen your capacity for discernment. It's like exercising a muscle. Each conscious resistance to archonic influence makes you stronger and more skilled at maintaining your mental sovereignty. The Tibetan masters taught that the Archons actually serve an unintentional evolutionary purpose. They force human consciousness to develop capacities that might otherwise remain dormant. Without the pressure of archonic manipulation, many humans would never learn to distinguish between their own thoughts and external influences. The polarity inversion technique works like this. Every time you identify an archonic insertion, instead of simply rejecting it, you use the energy of that manipulation attempt to strengthen an opposite positive quality. If they try to implant fear, you consciously cultivate courage. If they try anger, you cultivate compassion. If they try envy, you cultivate gratitude. Blavatsky discovered that this approach not only neutralizes the archonic attack, but actually results in a net gain of spiritual energy. It's like using an attacker's force against them in martial arts. The energy they invest in the manipulation attempt becomes fuel for your growth. She developed what she called a transmutation diary. Every night, you review the moments of the day when you felt archonic influence and consciously transform each experience into a lesson or strengthening of some virtue. Over time, this creates a mental attitude where you actually become grateful for archonic challenges because they've become opportunities for growth. One of the most powerful applications of this technique is in relationships with people who are being used as archonic transmitters. Instead of avoiding them or judging them, you see them as opportunities to practice compassion, patience, and discernment. Each encounter becomes a chance to strengthen your ability to maintain centeredness even in energetically turbulent environments. Blavatsky also discovered that groups of people practicing polarity inversion create collective energetic fields that not only repel archonic influence, but actually help other people in the area to free themselves as well. It's as if the group created an energetic immunity zone that benefits everyone in proximity. But there's an even more advanced technique she developed. Blavatsky learned to use archonic manipulation attempts as indicators that she was on the right track. When archonic influence intensifies, it often means you're doing something that threatens their control system. Instead of interpreting intensification of archonic attacks as a sign that something is wrong, you interpret them as confirmation that you're evolving in the right direction. It's like using wind resistance to know you're flying in the correct direction. Blavatsky created what she called an intensity map. She monitored when archonic attacks intensified and correlated this with her activities and spiritual development. This helped her identify which practices and directions were most effective for breaking archonic control. A fascinating discovery was that the Archons have energetic blind spots. There are certain qualities of consciousness that they simply cannot perceive or influence. Genuine humility is one of them. Authentic gratitude is another. Unconditional love is practically invisible to them. Blavatsky developed practices to cultivate these Archon invisible qualities as a way to move through the world without attracting unnecessary archonic attention. It's like having an energetic invisibility cloak. You can grow spiritually and help others without becoming a priority target. She also discovered that genuine humor and spontaneous joy are extremely disruptive to archonic operations. The Archons operate through heavy seriousness and emotional drama. When you can find absurd or comical aspects in archonic manipulation attempts, it literally turns off their effectiveness. Blavatsky created what she called conscious laughter therapy. Every time you catch the Archons trying to manipulate your thoughts, you laugh at their attempt. Not bitter or sarcastic laughter, but genuine laughter at the absurdity of the situation. This creates a vibrational frequency that is completely incompatible with archonic operations. But the most extraordinary discovery was yet to come. Blavatsky realized that there are specific moments when the veil between dimensions becomes thinner and extraordinary opportunities for liberation become available. She called these moments transcendence windows. Helena Blavatsky discovered that there are specific moments when archonic influence becomes dramatically weaker and extraordinary opportunities for spiritual liberation open up. She identified these periods by studying cosmic cycles, planetary patterns, and mainly observing the natural rhythms of human consciousness itself. The Tibetan masters revealed that the Archons depend on certain energetic configurations to maintain their effective control. During transcendence windows, these configurations temporarily alter, creating gaps in the control system that conscious people can use to make quantum leaps in their spiritual evolution. Blavatsky identified various types of transcendence windows. The most obvious are moments of natural transition: birth, death, seasonal changes, eclipses, specific lunar phases. During these periods, the veil between dimensions becomes thinner, and it's easier to access states of consciousness that are normally beyond the reach of archonic influence. But she discovered much more personal and practical windows that anyone can recognize and use. Moments of absolute mental silence, when all thoughts simply stop for a few seconds. Moments of overwhelming beauty that leave you temporarily speechless. Moments of deep connection with another person when all barriers dissolve. During these personal windows, your consciousness is operating at frequencies that the Archons cannot reach. If you learn to recognize these moments and consciously deepen them, You can establish anchors of free consciousness that become progressively more stable and lasting. Blavatsky developed specific techniques to maximize the potential of these windows. The first is simply recognizing when they're happening. Most people experience multiple transcendence windows every day, but we miss them because our attention is distracted or because we don't recognize the importance of these moments. The second technique is what she called conscious extension. When you realize you're in a transcendence window, a moment of mental silence, beauty, connection, or deep peace, you consciously try to extend that experience for a few more seconds through gentle attention and conscious breathing. Blavatsky discovered that practicing conscious extension gradually expands your ability to access and maintain states of free consciousness. It's like exercising a spiritual muscle. Each time you manage to extend a moment of transcendence, it becomes easier to access these states intentionally. One of the most powerful windows she identified happens in the first moments after waking, before the conscious mind fully activates. There's a 30-60 second window when you're conscious, but not yet identified with thoughts or worries. During this period, you're naturally in a state that is immune to archonic influence. Blavatsky created a specific morning practice to maximize this window. Upon waking, before moving or opening your eyes, you simply observe pure consciousness for a few moments. You feel the presence of being conscious without focusing on any specific content of consciousness. This anchors your energy in free frequencies that positively influence the entire rest of the day. She also identified collective windows that open during certain shared events. When groups of people simultaneously experience wonder, reverence, or deep connection, such as during a beautiful concert, an impressive natural phenomenon, or moments of genuine human solidarity, collective windows open that can accelerate the awakening of many people simultaneously. Blavatsky realized that the Archons make specific efforts to interrupt or distort these collective windows. They can insert conflict, fear, or distraction exactly at moments when groups of humans are experiencing transcendent connection. Recognizing this interference helps protect and prolong collective experiences of transcendence. A fascinating discovery was that intense personal crises often create unintentional transcendence windows. When old mental patterns are destroyed by challenging circumstances, there's a temporary opportunity to establish new patterns at higher frequencies. Blavatsky called this disguised opportunities. Instead of just trying to survive crises, you can consciously use them as catalysts for spiritual evolution. During periods of breaking old patterns, you have access to levels of change that would normally take years to achieve. The key is recognizing the opportunity within the crisis. Blavatsky also discovered that acts of genuine creativity open reliable transcendence windows. When you're genuinely creating, not just reproducing known formulas but bringing something new into existence, your consciousness operates at frequencies that are naturally free from archonic influence. This means that cultivating authentic creativity is actually a powerful spiritual practice. Any genuine creative act, writing, painting, composing, cooking, solving problems innovatively, strengthens your ability to operate in states of free consciousness. But Blavatsky discovered that there's an even more powerful transcendence window that is collectively opening for humanity at this specific historical moment. A planetary opportunity that hasn't happened for thousands of years. Helena Blavatsky predicted that a moment would come in human evolution when a planetary window would open, a unique historical period when it would be possible to break archonic control on an unprecedented collective scale. She believed she was helping to prepare humanity for this crucial moment. The Tibetan masters explained that human consciousness evolves in long cycles that correspond to larger cosmic movements. During most of history, humanity operates in what they called a cycle of forgetting, periods when archonic influence is stronger, and most humans remain unconscious of their true spiritual nature. But periodically, usually every 26,000 years, a cycle of awakening occurs when the veil between dimensions becomes thinner, planetary frequencies change, and extraordinary opportunities for collective evolution become available. Blavatsky believed that humanity was approaching one of these cycles. The evidence she collected suggested that the current awakening cycle would begin around the end of the 20th century and continue through the 21st century. During this period, more and more people would naturally begin questioning reality. seeking authentic spiritual experiences and developing capacities that had been dormant for millennia. Blavatsky predicted that during the planetary window, archonic control attempts would become more desperate and obvious, but also less effective. It's as if the control system would begin to malfunction as planetary frequencies changed. This would create unprecedented opportunities for collective liberation. One of the pieces of evidence she identified is what happens when a critical mass of people awakens simultaneously. Instead of gradual and linear change, quantum leaps occur in collective consciousness that can transform entire societies in relatively short periods. Blavatsky believed that during the planetary window it would be possible to create archonic influence-free zones, communities, regions, or even entire countries where people would develop collective immunity to mental manipulation. These zones would function as seeds for a new type of human civilization. Share in the comments if you feel you're experiencing some kind of accelerated awakening in recent years. It's important to document how many people are experiencing simultaneous consciousness changes. The signs of the planetary window that Blavatsky identified include dramatic increase in interest in authentic spirituality, exposure of control systems that were previously invisible, spontaneous development of psychic abilities in ordinary people, and breakdown of institutions based on external authority instead of inner wisdom. She also predicted that during this period, knowledge that had been hidden for millennia would begin to resurface naturally. Ancient texts would be discovered, authentic spiritual masters would emerge from all traditions, and practical techniques for spiritual development would become widely available. Blavatsky believed that the discovery of the Gnostic texts at Nag Hammadi in 1945 was one of the first signs that the planetary window was beginning to open. Knowledge that the Archons tried to destroy completely began to resurface exactly at the moment when humanity would be ready to use it. One of the most important characteristics of the planetary window is that small groups of people practicing spiritual liberation techniques would have disproportionate impact on the collective consciousness field. During normal periods, personal spiritual changes mainly affect the individual. During the planetary window, personal changes create waves that influence the entire network of human consciousness. This means that each person who learns to free themselves from archonic influence isn't just helping themselves, but contributing to the liberation of the entire human species. It's as if each individual awakening strengthened everyone else's capacity for awakening. Blavatsky also predicted that during the planetary window, the Archons would attempt increasingly desperate strategies to maintain control. They might intensify attempts to create collective fear, divide humanity into conflicting groups, and promote technologies that increase dependence and decrease capacity for independent thinking. But she believed these strategies would ultimately be counterproductive. The more obvious and extreme the control attempts became, the more people would naturally awaken to the reality of manipulation. Excessive control would create its own resistance. One of the most extraordinary opportunities of the planetary window is that it becomes possible to rewrite collective consciousness patterns that have been fixed for thousands of years. Limiting beliefs about human nature, relationships, work, spirituality. All these patterns become fluid and modifiable during periods of cosmic transition. Blavatsky developed specific techniques to work with these collective reprogramming opportunities. One of the most powerful involves groups of people simultaneously focusing on positive visions of human possibilities. During the planetary window, these collective visions have the potential to manifest much more quickly than during normal periods. She also identified that the planetary window would create opportunities for types of human cooperation that were impossible during most of history. When sufficient groups of people free themselves from archonic influence, they naturally develop forms of collaboration based on collective intuition, shared creativity, and energetic synchronization. But perhaps the most important discovery about the planetary window is that success doesn't depend on convincing all of humanity. Blavatsky calculated that only a small percentage of truly awakened people can tip the balance for the entire species. Helena Blavatsky discovered through her studies with the Tibetan masters that there's a tipping point in the evolution of human consciousness. When a specific percentage of the population develops resistance to archonic influence, the entire control system enters irreversible collapse. She called this the spiritual critical mass point. The calculations she made based on principles of spiritual physics suggested that only 3 to 5% of the world population developing true archonic immunity would be sufficient to liberate all of humanity. This may seem like a small percentage, but it represents tens of millions of people consciously working to free themselves from mental manipulation. Blavatsky understood that people don't need to be physically close or even conscious of each other to contribute to critical mass. Consciousness fields operate through principles of non-local resonance. Each person who genuinely liberates themselves creates waves that strengthen everyone else's capacity for liberation, regardless of geographical distance. The most fascinating discovery was that it's not necessary for these people to have the same belief system, practice the same techniques, or even use the same language to describe their experience. What matters is that they've developed authentic mental sovereignty, the ability to distinguish between their own thoughts and external influences. Blavatsky identified specific characteristics that people contributing to critical mass have in common. First, they've developed what she called automatic discernment, the ability to instantly recognize when a thought isn't genuinely theirs. Second, they maintain emotional states that are naturally incompatible with archonic manipulation: peace, gratitude, compassion, curiosity. Third, they operate from intrinsic motivations instead of external conditioning. They make choices based on genuine inspiration instead of fear, social pressure, or seeking approval. This quality of authenticity creates an energetic signature that is completely impermeable to archonic influence. Their crucial discovery was that people close to reaching spiritual critical mass often experience intensified periods of archonic testing, more aggressive attempts at mental manipulation as they approach the point of complete liberation. Blavatsky called this graduation symptoms. Instead of interpreting intensification of archonic interference as a sign of failure, informed people recognize it as evidence that they're making significant progress. It's as if the Archons made desperate efforts to regain control over consciousnesses that are escaping their influence. Blavatsky developed specific techniques to navigate these periods of intensified testing. The key is maintaining centeredness in the certainty that temporary intensification is actually evidence of progress, not regression. Each archonic test overcome exponentially strengthens your immunity to future manipulation attempts. She also discovered that people approaching critical mass begin to experience what she called synchronization phenomena, apparently accidental encounters with other awakened people, discovery of information exactly when needed, and unexpected opportunities to accelerate spiritual growth. These phenomena happen because free consciousnesses operate in harmony with natural flows of cosmic intelligence. When you're no longer being directed by archonic programming, your life naturally aligns with higher-order patterns that facilitate evolution and authentic connection. Blavatsky believed that during the current planetary window, the speed of approaching critical mass would be much faster than in previous cycles. Factors like instant global communication, availability of authentic spiritual teachings, and general intensification of planetary frequencies would dramatically accelerate the collective awakening process. She predicted that signs of approaching critical mass would include collapse of systems based on control and fear, spontaneous emergence of cooperative communities, widespread development of intuitive abilities, and rapid changes in cultural values toward sustainability and compassion. One of the most extraordinary implications of critical mass theory is that each person who frees themselves from archonic influence exponentially reduces the work needed to liberate everyone else. The first to awaken face maximum resistance, but create pathways that make it much easier for others to follow. Blavatsky compared this to the process of creating a trail through a dense forest. The first people need to cut through the vegetation, but once the trail is established, others can pass easily. Each person who awakens makes awakening more accessible to everyone else. This means that people working to free themselves from archonic influence aren't just helping themselves, they're contributing to the liberation of all humanity, including people who don't even know they need to be liberated. It's a form of spiritual service that directly benefits the entire species. Blavatsky also discovered that approaching critical mass would create changes in the planet itself that would make it more difficult for the Archons to operate. As free consciousnesses become more numerous, Earth's energetic frequencies begin to change in ways that are naturally incompatible with spiritual parasitism. But she warned that the period immediately before reaching critical mass would be the most challenging, because the Archons would make final and desperate attempts to maintain control. During this period, it would be crucial for awakened people to support each other and maintain focus on the greater vision of planetary liberation. Blavatsky's final and most inspiring discovery was that once critical mass is reached, the transformation becomes irreversible and spreads through the entire human population with surprising speed. Spiritual freedom becomes as contagious as archonic manipulation was previously. Helena Blavatsky dedicated her entire life to planting seeds that would flourish exactly at this moment in human history. She knew she wouldn't live to see the planetary liberation from the Archons, but she deeply believed that her discoveries and techniques would reach the right people at the right moment to make the decisive difference. In her final writings, Blavatsky left a specific message for the people who would be alive during the planetary window. You who are watching this video now, she predicted that when this knowledge resurfaced, it would be because humanity was finally ready to use it effectively. You didn't find this information by accident. There's a reason why your consciousness resonates with these concepts, why something within you recognizes the truth about the Archons, even when your logical mind questions. This resonance is evidence that you're part of the generation that came here specifically to complete the work that Blavatsky began. Blavatsky believed that people attracted to these teachings during the planetary window are what she called volunteer souls, consciousnesses that chose to incarnate at this specific period to help with planetary transition. You may not have conscious memories of making this choice, but some deep aspect of your being remembers the purpose. The most important legacy she left isn't the books or organizations she created. It's the understanding that each individual has the power to break the archonic control system simply by consciously choosing their own thoughts and refusing to be directed by external manipulation. She wanted you to know that you don't need to be special, enlightened, or have years of spiritual training to contribute significantly to planetary liberation. You just need genuine sincerity and willingness to consistently apply the simple techniques she developed to recognize and neutralize archonic influence. Every moment you consciously choose peace instead of reacting to implanted fear. Every time you question the origin of a negative thought. Every occasion when you cultivate authentic gratitude instead of focusing on artificial lacks. These apparently small acts are contributing to monumental changes in the collective consciousness field. Blavatsky especially wanted you to understand that doing this work doesn't require sacrificing joy, relationships, or material success. In fact, people who free themselves from archonic influence often discover that their lives become more harmonious, creative, and abundant, because they're no longer wasting energy in directions that don't serve their genuine well-being. What she most wanted to convey is that you already have everything you need to be completely free. The capacity for discernment, the spark of pure consciousness, the power of choice, all of this already exists within you. The Archons cannot take away these capacities. They can only try to distract you from using them. Blavatsky left specific instructions for people who feel called to help others awaken. First, work on yourself until you develop stable immunity to archonic influence. Second, share knowledge through personal example instead of trying to convince people who aren't ready. Third, support others who are on the same path by creating communities of mutual practice. She emphasized that liberation work must be done with compassion, never with superiority or judgment. People still under archonic influence aren't enemies. They're victims of the same system you're learning to transcend. Treating them with patience and love accelerates the collective awakening process. Blavatsky's final call to this generation is simple but profound. Remember who you really are. Below all the implanted thoughts, conditioned fears, and artificial desires, there exists a pure consciousness that has always been free and always will be free. Reconnecting with this essence is the most revolutionary act possible. She wanted you to know that you're not alone in this journey. Millions of people around the world are going through the same awakening process simultaneously. You're connected through consciousness fields that transcend physical limitations. Each personal victory strengthens everyone else. The future that Blavatsky envisioned, a humanity free from parasitic manipulation, operating from authentic creativity, genuine compassion, and inspired cooperation, isn't just possible, but inevitable, if enough people take responsibility for their own liberation. You're part of the solution she dedicated her life to making possible. Every day you practice mental discernment, every moment you choose love instead of fear, every time you refuse to be directed by external programming, you're honoring her legacy and contributing to the transformation she knew was possible. The work is almost complete. Critical mass is approaching, and you're here at exactly the right moment to make the difference your soul came to make. If this video resonated with you, share it with other people who might be ready to awaken. Leave a comment about which aspect of Blavatsky's teachings most impacted your understanding, and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring the truths they tried to hide from us for millennia. The planetary awakening is happening now, and you're part of it.